In Chapter 5, we're going to take a further look into linear functions. We're going to investigate slope, the various forms of linear equations, and then apply that to something called scatter plots. In our first section, we're going to be talking about rate of change and slope. Now, when we talk about rate of change, it can be written as a ratio showing a relationship between changing quantities, in this case, the vertical change and the horizontal change. Now, if you think back to when we talked about functions, we said that the x terms were our independent variables and our y terms were our dependent variables. So it's the change in y over the change in x. Our vertical change over horizontal change, and we sometimes just say rise over run. The formula that we use, and remember we represent slope with the variable m, is the change in y, which is our y2 minus y1, over our x2 minus x1. That's the slope formula, and again, those subscripts 1 and 2 just refer to 2 points on the line. The first way we're going to calculate slope is by reading it from a graph. And again, we talk about this ratio of rise over run. So let's take a look at a few examples of how we go about calculating this. We're going to remember that we're going to find this ratio. Now we're going to be given a graphed line, and we're going to look at those points that fall in the corners of each of the parts of the coordinate grid. So I can now do a count, and again, if we're talking about rise over run, I'm going to see that this line is going uphill here, so I'm going to count up 1, 2, and over 1. So it's a rise of 2, it's going up 2 and over 1. It's a 2 to 1 ratio. Slope is constant. I can count up 2 and over 1 again, and it will be the same throughout the whole length of the line. And we can simplify that to slope is equal to 2. In my second example here, you'll notice that the line is not going uphill, but it's going downhill. So that right away tells me that I'm going to have a negative slope. Now let's find that ratio. Again, rise over run. So we pick any 2 points. In this case, I'm going to pick this point here. I'm going to go down 1. So I'm going down 1. That's my rise there. And over 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a negative 1/4 ratio. Down 1, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So there we have our down 1 and over 1, 2, 3, 4, and there is our constant rate of change. Let's just take a look at 2 more examples. Again, what am I calculating? Slope. Slope is a ratio of rise over run. It's about the change. This one again is going uphill, so I'm going to be starting at any one of these given points. I'm going up 1 and over 1, 2, 3, 4. Up 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. This one is a positive 1/4 ratio. And our last one again has a downhill appearance, and we read a graph from left to right, so I'm going down 1 and over 2, down 1 over 2. It's a negative 1/2. And that's how you read slope from a graph. But most of the time we're not given a graphed line, we are given points on the line. So that's when we rely on our knowledge of the slope formula. And again, that formula is, and I'm sure a lot of you have that committed to memory already, change in y, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Those subscripts just refer to, say, point A and point B. If we go back to that previous slide, you'll see that there were a series of points. That first point would be my, say, point A, and that would be my x1, y1, and the second point would be my point B, and that would be my x2, y2. So let's just take this, and again, in the beginning, I noticed that a lot of students will label their points, because you want to be sure that you get these in the right places. So again, we're going to take our y2, negative 2 minus 0, over 3 minus a negative 1. Notice that I put that negative 1 in parentheses so I don't forget that when I subtract I have to add the opposite. Negative 2 minus 0 will be negative 2. And then add the opposite here. I get 4. And I simplify always. And I get my slope to be a negative 1/2. Let's see that again. Slope is a ratio of rise over run. Change in the y's over change in the x's. My x2 is negative 1. I'm sorry, my y2 is negative 1 minus 3. My x2 minus my x1. Let's go ahead and simplify by adding the opposite. That gives me a negative 4 over 3. And there's my slope. Important to remember whether it's positive or negative, and that has something to do with the direction of the line on the coordinate plane. When we're looking at those particular graphs, we're looking at whether the line is again rising or falling, and we'll talk a little bit about that more in the next slide. But in this particular slide, we're going to talk about two other unique types of lines. I mentioned the uphill positive and the downhill negative. Well, here we have a horizontal and a vertical line. Well, let's just imagine that we were asked to calculate from points. And so we'll put a couple of points here on our coordinate plane. And let's name those coordinates. The ordered pair here would be 1, 2, 3, 4. That's going to be negative 4 and up 1, 2, 3. There's my point A, my x1, y1. And then I have 2 and 1, 2, 3. So now let's show using the slope formula. Change in y over change in x. 3 minus 3 over 2 minus a negative 4. This is going to give me 0 over 6, so my slope is 0. And think about it. This line is going straight across, not up, not down. There's no incline or decline. It has a 0 slope. Let's take a look at our next problem, and let's suppose we have these 2 points. And let's name these 2 points. It looks like this one is negative 2, 2, and this one is negative 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so let's find our slope. We'll take 6 minus 2 over negative 2 minus negative 2. Add the opposite here, gives me 0. When we should remember that when we're looking at a problem and we're dividing by 0, we cannot divide by 0. That's an undefined statement. So my slope of this line is also undefined. Another way I remember it is that two things. The horizontal line is a 0 slope. They both have z's. The vertical line is undefined, and think about the 0 as being under the fraction bar, so under and undefined. All right, so hopefully that's helpful. One thing more before we end our session today is that when we're looking at this, we talked about 4 different types of lines. We had our uphill positive slope. It's rising. It's going upward. Our downhill negative slope. When a line is straight across, there is no slope at all. That's a 0 slope. And the slope of a vertical line is undefined. And there you have our 4 basic types of lines, how they're graphed, and how we can find their slopes.